You need to add an image to the page. How difficult could that be? Well, it turns out it's not so easy. So the Next.js image component is extremely powerful, but you do need to know how it works. So it can help you out with layout shift. It can do some basic optimizations for you, like create different sizes of the image. It lazy loads the image, so it only loads when it comes into viewport. It helps you out with the blur up effect as the image loads. So very powerful component, but most people in practice struggle with this component. So I prepared 5 common layouts for you, and we're going to go through each one, and I'll show you exactly how to use the Next.js image component in each one. I recommend that you watch the video in full because I'll explain all the little details as we go through those common layouts. So in Next.js with this component you can do basic optimizations, but very often you want to go beyond the basics and you want to use a third-party service. So I will also show you how that works. So in this video we're going to use ImageKit. So ImageKit helps you optimize and transform your images and also videos, and you can upload images to their media library and host it with ImageKit, but maybe you already are hosting them with, for example, S3 or Google Cloud Platform, and you can keep your images there as well. ImageKit can then automatically compress and convert images to an optimized format like WebP, for example. And you can do a lot of sophisticated transformations on these images. So when you upload to ImageKit, you get a URL for that image. It will automatically convert it to WebP. And then if I want to make any transformation, I can just add this query param where I say transform is, and then in this case, I made the width 500 pixels. But they also have more sophisticated transformations like AI cropping, adding watermarks, and even for video HLS or dash streaming. So they have SDKs for the framework in which you want to use them. Now in this case, we're going to use Next.js. We're going to integrate it with the Next.js image component, as you'll see, with a custom loader as it's called. They actually have a very generous free tier, and you'll see it's a very powerful combination because we'll get all of the benefits from the Next.js image component, and then in addition, even more sophisticated features from ImageKit. And they are of course today's sponsor. Example 1, let's say we have some kind of a hero section on a landing page. We have some text, a button, and let's say we want to have an image next to here, very standard layout. So here I have my image. It's a huge image. Now, traditionally in HTML and also in JSX, of course, we have the native image tag. So I can just use its URL. You can see it's a huge image, so it takes up a lot of space. So then here with CSS, you can change its styles. Let's say I want this to be 400 pixels wide. So if we don't really care about what the height is going to be, we can say it's H auto. All right, so then we have this. So this is with the native image tag. What is wrong with this? We're only displaying this image in a small area like this. We're still loading over the internet this huge image. You can actually see how big it is if you go to network and just refresh this, 2.5 megabytes. And there are other issues with this as well. So now let's actually convert this to the image component in Next.js, and let's see what we get. So the way that we do it right now is with an external image. So here we can prevent layout shift by telling the browser, hey, this image is going to be this particular width and height. So you can already reserve that space, so then when the image actually is loaded, it doesn't shift other parts around. Here the width is going to be 400, but what is the height going to be? Because we haven't explicitly set the height. So let me just try 100 just so we can get rid of the error. Before we can actually see our image, we have another error here. So we need to go to the Next.js config. Now we don't want somebody else to use our server to optimize their images. So we may want to restrict this even further. All right, so now we see our image again. We can see it actually just renders this native image tag on the page. The way to think about it is first you style the size of the image with CSS, just like you're used to. And then as an optimization, you can use these width and height properties. Right? So this is not what you use to actually specify how large the image should be on the page. That's something that you still do with CSS. Right? This is more like an optimization that you can do after styling it to prevent that layout shift. So when you hover the image, you can see the height, and we can also see it down here. So the height is some 266, so we can actually be super precise. And actually we also need to specify an alt value here. This will be displayed in case the image cannot be loaded, or for people that are using screen readers. The first thing that the browser will receive is actually HTML. It doesn't know anything about CSS yet or JavaScript. So the browser can see, hey, there's going to be an image, but the browser doesn't know how much space it's going to take up because the size depends on the CSS, right? The CSS and the style sheet and things like that come later. But now with width and height, we can already specify in the HTML here, width and height, how big that space is going to be. So it can already reserve that space. So it's not going to shift other content around later. That's the only reason why I'm using width and height here. And it's also important to note it's more about the ratio than the specific value here. Now in the real world, of course, we want to have responsive layouts, right? So in Tailwind, it's always a little bit tricky. Tailwind is mobile first. So if you want the big one on bigger devices, you say from medium and up, we have this bigger width. And then on a smaller device, you do it without the breakpoint. Let's say that's 250 pixels. Right? So now you can see on smaller devices, it's 250 pixels. Once it crosses the medium breakpoint and up, it's going to be the 400. Now here it's 250. So when somebody goes to this page on a mobile phone, let's say, we also want to prevent layout shift. And to prevent that layout shift, we have the width and height props. But here I still have the values from the wider viewport. So now on a smaller device, the width is 250, but here I have 400, for example. So should we change these? Well, not necessarily, because remember, it's about the ratio. So the ratio for these two numbers is actually about 1.5. So if the ratio that it has on the smaller viewport is the same, we don't have to change anything. So let's see what we have. So here the width is 250, height 166, and that is the same ratio, 1.5. So we don't have to change this. So if you want to be a little bit more certain that you're going to keep that aspect ratio as you're going to resize the image over time, you actually can set the aspect ratio in CSS. So here I can actually also just set it to something like this so that it will always keep that ratio. So that's something you may want to use as well. There is something that's even more important here, which has to do with srcSet as well as sizes. A lot of people are confused by these two as well. So it actually starts with srcSet. Let's talk about this a little bit. If you remember from the native image tag at the beginning, we were able to display the image just like this, but we were still loading this huge image over the internet. And so we were displaying it like this with CSS, but we were loading this gigantic image of 2.5 megabytes. So that's very inefficient. So ideally what we could do is we could take this image and create a smaller version of that. So just the amount that we need here, which is like 400 pixels and some height. And then on mobile, we would like that to be even smaller, right? So on mobile, we can use an even smaller version of this image, this gigantic source image. We can create a derivative of this, another version of the image, basically another image file that is even smaller that we can then load on mobile. So we can use this srcSet for that. So what we could do is we can say we want to have an image file specifically for when the image is 400 pixels wide. And then we want to have another image file that is the one that we want to use for when the image is 250 pixels wide. This image here, this URL here needs to be changed so that we actually get an image that is not so huge. The standard syntax for this that you'll see around is provide a parameter in the URL. So we would like to take that original image and create like a derivative of it, like create a separate image file that is exactly 400 pixels wide as well. So then that's the one that we're going to use when the size for the image as specified by the CSS is also 400 pixels. That would be a perfect match, because then with CSS, we say the width here is going to be 400 pixels. And then over the internet, what we're actually downloading is also 400 pixels, right? And then here on a smaller device with CSS, we style this to be 250 pixels wide. And what we would like to download over the internet is not this gigantic image of 2.5 megabytes. We would like to download an image that is, of course, exactly 250 pixels wide as well. So here we would also like to do something like W is 250, right? So then ideally this server that we're making that request to can see that this is part of the URL and it can return an image of that particular width. This is the image URL that we want to load for when the image is 400 pixels wide, right? As determined by the CSS, right? So srcSet is just a set of options for the image that could be loaded on the page. Now remember, the first thing that the browser will receive is just the HTML. So the browser does not know when it first receives the HTML how wide the image is going to be, right? That's actually why we specified width and height here, because the browser doesn't know how much size, how much space the image will take up. So we can already tell the browser, hey, we know it's going to take up this size. So reserve that space already. So that's not going to shift other content around. And now we need to do something similar here, because now we have specified the options for the browser, right? So we tell the browser, hey, when the image is 400 pixels wide, this is the file that you need to get. But the browser doesn't know what the size of the image is going to be, right? And that's why we have sizes here. So we can already tell the browser when it first gets the HTML, hey, when the viewport is, let's say, this big, right? You can ignore this. Well, then the image is going to be 400 pixels wide, right? So let's take a look. So here, medium in Tailwind, that's 768 pixels. So below 768 pixels, the image is going to be 250 pixels wide, right? And that's the only thing we need to specify here. So we can actually have like a media query. So when the width is at most 760 pixels, the image size is going to be 250 pixels, right? And else, so above 768. After that, we can just specify 400 pixels. This will be included as part of the initial HTML. If the viewport is small, if it's a mobile phone, let's say, and the viewport is, let's say, 500, that is less than this. So now the browser knows, hey, oh, the image is going to be 250 pixels wide. So then it can go to the set of options and it can find the best possible match for that. We have actually explicitly said, hey, if the image is 250 pixels, pick this URL to download the image, so that we actually load the smallest possible image to save as much space as possible. Now, if a user comes to a page and they are on a desktop and the viewport is 1900 pixels wide, the browser will receive HTML. It doesn't know how big the image is going to be, right? So we as developers can see it right here in class name, but in reality, it depends on the style sheet. It's a separate file. It's loaded after the HTML. So the browser doesn't know initially when it receives the HTML that the image is going to be 400 pixels wide on a viewport like that. Here we tell the browser, hey, if the viewport is, if it's bigger than 768, so above 768, the image is going to be 400 pixels wide. So now the browser knows, oh, I need to pick this URL to download the image because that fits best with this 400 pixels from sizes, right? So ideally, of course, when we use a URL like this and we make a request to the imager server, that imager would actually return me an image that is of that particular width. Right now, Imager isn't set up to do that for us like this. Right? I'm just using Imager as an example as my host here. But our own Next.js server will be able to do this actually, as we'll see in a second. And actually, if you use something like ImageKit, so if you host your image on ImageKit, it's actually very easy. You can do something like this, right? So Imager isn't set up to do that, but other servers are. Now, it's a little bit cumbersome to specify the entire source set. So I have some good news for you. We don't need to do that with the image component. We can actually just remove this. We only need to specify how large the image is going to be on a particular viewport. And with Next.js, the source set is automatically generated for you. I do need to specify the original source here so that Next.js knows the original source image so it can generate those derivatives from that. So this image actually should have that source set. You can see here we have sizes, and then here it has a source set. So these are all the possible options that the browser can pick from. And so you can see it's a lot. So what Next.js does, it automatically looks at your sizes here, and from that it has some standard intervals. So this is actually coming from our own Next.js server. Remember, Next.js, it has both a client side as well as a server side. So our own server right now, not Imager, our own Next.js server right now is going to generate a derivative of that original source image. And then at the end, we see those parameters actually. So we see that this image needs to be 256 pixels wide. So our Next.js server will actually generate an image that is of this particular width from that original source. Now, we could also do this with ImageKit, and we can also specify quality parameters. So by default, it's actually set to 75%. Now, when you hover any of these URLs, you will also see which one is currently loaded. So right now, the viewport here is 900 pixels wide. So in the sizes, we specify that if it's 900 pixels wide, the image width is going to be 400 pixels wide. That's what we specified here with sizes. Then the browser knows, so the image is going to be 400 pixels. So out of all of these options, it's going to find the one that's closest to there. So here we have an image that's 384 pixels. Now it will not pick that one because the image here will be displayed at 400 pixels. If you load an image that's slightly smaller than that, it's going to stretch. It's going to look distorted. So the 400 pixels is more like a minimum. The next one is actually this one that's actually 640 pixels wide. And if you hover any of these, and you can see the one that's currently loaded is indeed this 640. If I click on that, you can actually see it in a new tab. So this is the image that's actually coming over the internet, you could say, to be displayed here, right? And you can see this is much smaller than this gigantic image that we had before. And you can actually also see that here. So here in .next, if we go into cache and then images, you will actually see images here. You will see actual WebP image files that have been generated for me. So you get those basic optimizations out of the box with the Next.js image component. But as we just saw, it does run all on your Next.js server. If you don't want to have all of those images on your own server, you may want to use a third-party service like ImageKit, which can do the exact same for you and has a lot of other benefits as well, like more sophisticated transformations and much more. We'll talk more about ImageKit in a second. All right, now one other confusing part is that some screens, for example, I'm on a MacBook recording right now, my screen has more pixels available. So in my DevTools here, I have specified a device pixel ratio of 1, but that's only in the DevTools here. If I close out of here, my computer actually has a DPR of 2. meaning there are more pixels available on a screen like mine. And therefore, if I actually take a look at which image is loaded here, my image here that's loaded on my computer is actually 1200 pixels wide because I have more pixels available on my screen. So on a wider screen, we say that the image size is going to be 400 pixels. And so the browser now is, okay, I'm going to take a look here at what's the best match for that. So that's going to be this 640 pixel one. But then another factor is how many is your DPR. So on a DPR of 1, it will indeed pick this 640. But if you have twice as many pixels available on your screen, the browser will think we can take this 640 pixels size image, but you actually have twice as many pixels available. So we may actually want to take a look at an image that is actually twice as big. So it will actually take this 1200 pixel image, right? So if you're testing this on a MacBook, make sure that you're taking that into account when you make these tests. In the DevTools, you can actually specify DPR as well. You may need to get that from the settings here in case you don't see it yourself, right? A fancy word for this is a retina screen. Retina is actually just like a branding name by Apple. So for the rest of the tutorial, I will just look at DPR of 1. Another good thing, by the way, is when you're testing this, you may actually also want to disable the cache, because if you've already downloaded a bigger version of the image, then when you try to load a smaller one, the browser won't do that, because the browser thinks, well, I already downloaded this big image. I'm not going to download the smaller image now because we already have a big one in the cache. Right, so while you're testing this, I like to disable the cache as well. But there are also other things that the browser takes a look at. For example, the user's internet speed. So if the user has bad internet, the browser may actually pick a smaller image so that you're not transferring too many bytes. Right, so with sizes, we just give one hint to the browser, but that doesn't mean that for sure it's going to pick a certain option. The browser takes other things into consideration as well. If you want to make sure that the browser actually picks a very specific URL, you may want to take a look at the picture element in HTML. So what they actually recommend is that on the images that load above the fold, right, so before I start scrolling down, so here on a hero image, very typical, that you actually add the priority to here. So I can say priority is true, or in JSX, you can actually leave off true here. If it's a Boolean, the mere presence of it means it's going to be true. So this means it will load with priority. So it will not be lazy loaded. It will be loaded as fast as possible. And this is actually recommended over the loading is eager option that you may know about from the past. A very common effect for when the image is loading is a blur up effect. So before the final image has been completely loaded, we may load a lower quality version of this image first that is blurred out. So basically just an image with low quality, for example, or just low in width or height, that will simply be scaled up to fit this area, but we can make it blurry so it looks kind of nice. We can do that here as well with the Next.js image component. We can say placeholder is blur. Now with an external image, which we have here, it's not in our local file system. This is somewhere else on the internet. We need to specify ourselves what the URL is for that lower quality image, that placeholder image. So we would have to generate this ourselves. ImageKit makes it very easy to manipulate this image, create the derivatives of it. So I can just specify certain transformations I want to make to this image with tr equals, I can make it a width of, let's say, 300. So now you can see ImageKit has generated another file off of that original source image that's now only 300 pixels wide. And then I can also easily blur this with comma and then another transformation BL30, let's say. And you can see now we get this blurred image. So it's easier to generate these blur up images with ImageKit. That's one way of getting the URL. Now it does need to be in base 64 format. So you have to then also convert it to base 64. So it's a bit of a hassle to generate this image if you have an external image. So now let's actually take a look at a local image, and you'll see that it simplifies things by a lot. So I put this image actually here in my public folder. This is where you want to put your static asset like an image. So here you can see I have it in my public folder. This is the same image. So now I want to use this on my page. How do we do that? So here we have the source, right? So we still have a source. We still need a source. Let me put that here. How do I now reference this image here? Well, you have two options here actually. So everything in the public folder you can reference in your code like this. So stock prices -photo.jpg. I'm going to remove the blur stuff for now. I'm going to save here. Now you can see I still see the image here. So technically this works, referencing the image like this, but certain optimizations like an automatic blur data URL will not not be generated for you if you do it like this. So instead you want to import it in a different way if you want to use those optimizations. So you actually want to import it just like you would do an npm package, let's say. Right, so now if I save here, and actually we need one more. So now if I save here and now I go back, you can see I still have this here. Now one of the benefits of having a local image is we don't have to specify width and height, so we can actually leave this off. And one other benefit is now you can just specify placeholder blur, and the Next.js server will automatically create that blurred image URL for you. Now it's good to mention you cannot add files here while the project is running. So if you want to allow users to upload images, let's say, you cannot put them in the public folder, right? So only during development is where we can put files here, or using ImageKit, which easily allows your users to upload images as well. So this was a simple layout. Let's go to example 2. So here we have another common layout where you have the image that essentially spans the entire width of the container, of some container. And that also means that when we make it responsive, you can see we have the situation here where it will get smaller and smaller as the viewport gets smaller. So here we have the image component, so we still have a source, and then here I'm styling it with CSS. So what we want is that this image just takes up whatever the width is of the parent element, right? So we have width full, right? So until in CSS, if I hover it, you can see it's going to be 100% width. Now here we actually do want to set a fixed height. Otherwise, the height will depends on how large the original image is, but that's not what I want. I always want this image to be 400 pixels tall. So in that case, you actually want to use object cover. This will make sure that the aspect ratio of the image is preserved when you're actually displaying it here. So it will cut off part of the image if necessary, right? So that's all styling with CSS. So after that, we have to take a look at these width and height properties to prevent layout shift. So I just put in some placeholders here because if you don't do it, you'll get an error. So now I still have to fix this. So now I can take a look and I can see, okay, so how wide is this image? So here I can see the image is 900 pixels wide and 400 pixels tall. So here for width, I can say 900. For height, I can say 400. Now, the problem with a layout like this is, of course, that the width and height change. On a wide viewport, indeed, the width is 900 by 400. But if a user comes to this page on a mobile phone, let's say, it's going to be something like this. That's on a mobile phone, this is going to be the width and this is going to be the height, more like a square shape. On a mobile, the width would actually be something like maybe 400, and actually the height stays the same, right? So the height is still 400 as well, right, on mobile phone. So you can see that on a mobile phone, the width and height would actually be different. There would be a different ratio. So in practice, it's actually very difficult to get these width and heights correct. So instead, what a lot of people also do is they use the other option, which is you can use fill. So you can just leave fill, right? So in JSX, if you have a Boolean value like that, just the presence of it means it's true. We just specify fill. In that case, you don't have to specify the width and height props yourself. Next.js will actually apply some styles to here, like absolute positioning. So if we inspect this, so now you can see it has absolute positioning. It has height and width of 100%. So typically what you want to do is just create a separate div that will actually just be responsible for the size of the image, right? So I'm actually going to create a separate div for it. And then this div will take care of the size of the image as how it is displayed on the page. So I would make this one relative. I can remove it from here. And then this one should have the actual width and height, right? So remember, this image now has height 100%, width 100% automatically applied because of fill here. So I don't need to style that myself like this. So the width and height styling, I can move to the div itself. I can remove these from the image. Now the image itself, I still want to use object cover because I want it to look good, not distorted. Right, so now when I go back here, you can see I have the same layout as before, but now I don't need to specify width and height on the image itself. And all the width and height styling is now on the parent element here. But we should also supply the srcSet so that it can generate that source set. So with srcSet, remember, we're just going to tell the browser how large the image is going to be displayed on the page. Right, so on small viewports, we can actually see that. So we can see the container, this overall container has a width at most of 900. When it gets less than that, the image just takes up actually 100% of the viewport. So what we can say here is when the viewport is at most 900 pixels, and so you only really specify the width of the image. We don't really work with the height of images. So here we say the width of the image is going to be 100% of the viewport, right? So if the viewport width is, let's say, 500 pixels, the image will also be 500 pixels wide, right? If the viewport is 800 pixels, it's going to be 800. Now, if we go beyond 900, well, the image is constrained to the maximum size of the container, right? So no matter how big I make it here, it's always going to be 900 here. So here it's just going to be 900 pixels, the image. Based on this, Next.js can generate an optimized source set for us. Now, what if you have some padding actually? That's also quite common. Let's say there is actually some padding, horizontal padding of, let's let's say 8 in tailwind. So now you can see the image is not taking up everything in this overall container. There's just some additional padding here. Maybe also on the top here. Let's also quickly do that. But it's mostly about the width of the image here. So here when we specify in sizes how large the image is going to be, well, if you have padding, that may actually change a little bit. So here we say when the viewport width is below 900, it's going to be 100% of the viewport width. Well, is that true? So if it is indeed 900 here, is the image actually 100% of the viewport width right now? Right? And actually the answer is no. It never becomes 100% of the viewport width here anymore because now we have padding. So here, this is not going to be the correct size of the image. Now you could ignore that. It's only a small difference. So basically we're specifying the image to be a little bit too big. This may result in an image that's being loaded that's a little bit too big. Not the end of the world, but if we want to be precise, we may want to calculate here. So the image width right now is going to be something less than 100% of the viewport width. So we can use calc here actually. So we can say it's going to be something like 100% of the viewport width minus the padding on these two sides. 32 pixels, so 64 pixels in total. So you would do something like this, right? So now this is the correct size of the image when the viewport is below 900, right? So if you have padding and you want to be very precise, you may want to use the calc option as well. So far, everything that we've been doing with the Next.js image component, creating different versions of this image, all of that runs on our own Next.js server, right? And you can see that because here in srcSet, you can see all of these links, they have _next. That's a folder in our own project. Now this does have certain limitations. So in the real world, you often do want to use something like ImageKit because it has more sophisticated optimizations and transformations that you can take. So I have uploaded this image here in my ImageKit dashboard. You get this media library where you have both a dashboard and with search, etc. But you also can programmatically interact with that. So I have uploaded this here. So this is the big image, right? So this is the original source image. If I go here now, I have updated it. I can remove that from the URL. But you can see now this image here, it's the same image, still a huge image here, but it's now coming from ImageKit. So now with ImageKit, I can also transform this into all of those sizes. So with ImageKit, you say you have a param here. So you say transform, you say TR, and then whatever transformation you want to take. So here, for example, in the source set here, we have a width of 8 to 8, let's say. I can do the exact same here. I can say, give me a version of this image with 828 width. And you can see now I get this image. Now, one of the benefits is with ImageKit, you get more sophisticated transformations you can make as well, like a blur filter. You can remove the background of an image, very helpful for e-commerce. You can add watermarks to your images very easily. It's all put on a CDN for us. WebP versions are all created for us by ImageKit now. So let's see how we can integrate a third-party ImageKit with the Next.js image component now. So the only thing I actually have to do here is instead of having a source like this, I just need the name of the image. So if I go here, you can see the name of my image is actually just stock prices. That's now the only thing I have to specify for source. Now, this alone, of course, won't work because the Next.js image component doesn't know anything about stock prices. What is this? We need to what's called resolve this source into a URL like this, right? So I will just say resolve into a URL that's going to be like this, right? So here we want to take the stock prices, and actually with ImageKit, you have like a base URL. So here ByteGrad is my ID on ImageKit. And then here you have the name of the asset. And then after that, you have all the transformations you can take. So how can we do that with the Next.js image component? Well, we can specify a so-called custom loader, as it's called. It looks very complicated, but actually is very straightforward. We have the ImageKit loader, and that's going to be a function. So that function looks like this. Don't be intimidated. It's actually very straightforward. You can copy paste it from the documentation. It's very easy. They have a very easy Next.js setup. When it creates all of those URLs for the source set, it will run through this. So it will take the source, whatever string you specify here, and it will give you that here in that function. So we can take that source, we can return a URL that is going to be like this. And then we also get a width here. So this width will actually be the width that will be part of the source set. This function will be called multiple times for each of those widths. And then optionally also the quality, right? So remember, we can also specify the quality here because ImageKit will create a WebP version of this. It will compress that original JPEG. We can specify how much it should compress. We can actually leave off because the default is going to be 75%. So let me actually specify the type here. So source, width, and then quality is actually optional. So this actually only works in a client component. Now this is my page component. So typically I don't recommend that you make the entire page a client component, but this is just an example. And now if we take a look at the source set that was generated for us, still by Next.js, but now you can see all of those URLs are pointing at ImageKit's servers. So it's now ImageKit that's going to be responsible for actually creating all of those derivative files, serving them through a CDN. And you can see when I click on any of them, served from ImageKit. And if I inspect this, you can see it's a small size, right? Only 21 kilobytes actually. And you can see here when I scroll down, it's a WebP version, right? So ImageKit can do this automatically. You can actually specify this in the settings here. By default here, if I go to settings, when you upload an image and you use it in your project, by default, actually, it will create a WebP version. And here it will actually also automatically optimize the image quality. Actually, the default quality on ImageKit is 80%, right? So there are other settings that we can add here. You don't have to specify the format or the quality yourself. ImageKit will automatically deliver an optimized image. Let's take a look at some other layouts as well. So example 3 here shows a 3-column layout on desktop, and then as the viewport gets smaller, it turns into a 2-column layout, eventually a 1-column layout, right? So here we have cards, let's say, but any kind of gallery type of layout would look something like this. So here I created a card component for each one. The layout here, I'm just using CSS grids. That doesn't really matter for image optimization, right? So we have 3 cards here, right? So here I have a separate component. This is the card component. So this has a div that for the entire card. Then we have the content, the text content below there, and then we have our image here. So I'm going to use ImageKit here to actually load my image, right? So here I would still need to specify width and height, but we just saw that it's a very fluid layout. So that width and height changes drastically as the viewport changes. So here it's easier to just use fill. And typically you want to create a separate div in that case. And you want to make that div responsible for the actual image sizing. So this one would then become relative. And then let's say I want this image to be the full width of that card, but always a height of 170 pixels. And because we are changing the width and height of the image, it's typically a good idea to use something like object cover so that it doesn't look distorted. Object cover is just something the browser can quickly do. It has nothing to do with width or height or sizes. All right, so if we do that, this is what we have. Now to get a proper source set, we do need to specify sizes here. So with sizes, we specify how wide the image is going to be, right? So here on a wide viewport, the image is going to be 380 pixels wide, right? So on a wide viewport, so this wide means 1200 pixels. So max width 12. I like to work with max width. You can also work with minimum width, but for me, it's a little bit more intuitive to work with max. So if it's below 1200 pixels, we don't know yet what it's going to be, but if it's bigger than that, it's going to be 380 pixels, right? So if it's bigger than that, it's 380 pixels wide. Now, how do we work with when it's smaller than 1200? So now, for example, it's not 380 pixels wide anymore. It's a little bit less. And it gets even trickier because if I push a little bit more, you can see at some point it starts to move onto a new line and then it becomes wider again. And then boom, now it's wider again. Now in practice, what I see people do, so here, for example, people will say, oh, there are 3 columns. So approximately the image will be 33% of the viewport, right? So there is some padding in between here as well on the sides as well. So it's not perfectly 33% of the viewport. That is approximately true. So here we could say something like 33% of the viewport width. At some point it becomes a 2-column layout. So here it becomes like 50%. It's not perfect because there's some padding here, but it's approximately true, right? So you could do something like this. When the width is smaller than that, an image becomes 50% of the viewport width, right? So this is about 50%. And then later here, it becomes 100% of the viewport width. Well, a little bit less, right? So you can use calc as well to subtract the padding from there, right? So if you have a column type of layout, so if you have 3 columns, you would have one for 33%, 50%, and then 100%. All right, example for a background image. Let's say we want to have a background image that spans the entire viewport, and then we have some text on top. You could technically do a background image with CSS background image. I find it's a bit easier to just use the Next.js Image components for this. Just like all the other examples, I'm just going to use ImageKit loader here so that's all optimized by ImageKit. And then I'm going to use fill here, which will make the position absolute, and it will make the height and width 100%, make the main element the relative, and then it will take up that entire space. Now we do want to make sure that it sits below all the other things. I just have a negative Z index here. So then if I have text, which is what we see here, you need to make sure that this is also positioned, as it's called. So the default for position is actually static. You need to make it something else than static, and then just to be certain also a positive Z index. If you have a background color on the main here, then the negative Z index may actually place this image below the background color. So in that case, some other positive number, but still less than the Z index on this one. All right, now with sizes, we always need to specify how large the image is going to be. Now here it's actually quite easy. The image is always going to be 100% of the viewport. All right, now what if you have some kind of gallery and you allow your users to upload photos and you want to display it as a masonry type type of layout, let's say. But the images that your users upload can be in different sizes. So for example, here we have our own image that we already used, has a certain height. But then this image maybe was also uploaded, has a different height. When you allow your users to upload, you may not know the size of the image that they're going to upload. So you don't know the size, right? So it's very easy to allow your users to upload, right? You could use the upload widget by ImageKit. You will get all of the images here in your media library. You can easily manage it, but you also want to display it here. So width is easy because they all need to be the same width. So that's not the hard part, right? So let's say that it's going to be 300 pixels, but we have a height of auto because we don't want to set one specific height for each one. It will just depend on the image itself. We don't want to set a fixed height. When you don't know the width or height is also when you just want to use fill, right? So then just like before, I can create a wrapper div and I will make this relative. And then here I can have my sizes for the image, right? So you would do something like this. And then for sizes, it's actually very similar to the column layout that we saw before, right? So that's assuming we don't know what the height of the image will be. ImageKit actually does give you metadata about the image as well. It will actually give you the height of that image, right? So that was a lot to take in. I think it's a complex component, but hopefully this video helped you out a bit. I want to thank ImageKit for sponsoring this video. Check out ImageKit. They have lots of additional features that you don't get out of the box with the Next.js image component. It also works with external storage, so if you already have your images on S3, you can still easily integrate it here with ImageKit. You can use the media library to easily manage hundreds or even thousands of assets, not just in the dashboard, also with their API. Also works with videos, by the way, so we looked at images, but works with videos as well, and lots more advanced features that you simply don't get out of the box in Next.js. So I would say check out ImageKit as well. I want to thank you for watching this video. Hopefully it was helpful, and then I hope to see the next one. Bye.